I'm Teresa Kremin, work at the Open University, and this is an Open University Literacy and Social Justice Centre seminar, which we have 2 a year, to share some of the current research that's happening nationally and internationally, both with practitioner colleagues, but also with policymakers and other researchers right around the world. And today, I'm delighted to be introducing you to my colleague and friend, I count her as one, Professor Natalia, who's not only a professor of early childhood education and development at the University of Stavanger, but is a professor of reading and children's development at the Open University, indeed where she did her PhD with us many years ago. Natalia researches the use of media, technologies. She developed the Our Story app while she was at the OU as part of her PhD. And she's especially interested in the use of ebooks in digital technologies. She's an activist in this space. She's an absolutely prolific writer. I know nobody, let alone another professor, nationally or internationally, who can write with the speed and alacrity that Natalia achieves. In fact, a colleague and I were discussing just that yesterday. She's a hugely respected academic, was Karen Littleton, a hugely respected academic, and we're delighted that she's agreed to share her most recent work based around the Jacobs Foundation Fellowship with us today on scented stories. I know she will engage and inspire each one of us, and I'm very pleased and delighted to be handing over to her now. Welcome, Natalia.
Oh, thank you so much, Teresa. I really appreciate the generous introduction and delighted to be here and to see so many people joining this afternoon. I hope that what I share will resonate at some level with all of you. It's a bit of a new topic for me as well. Teresa mentioned in the introduction that I have been historically looking at children's digital stories and ebooks. And now I'm venturing into a new domain, looking at stories that smell and that have different scents and odors with them. So I'll take you on my journey, talking about one particular project where we are looking at children's scented stories. So I'll structure my conversation with some slides that should be working now. Okay, so I'm based at the University of Stavanger in Norway, as Teresa mentioned, and also working at the Open University. And the work that I'll be mostly referring to today has been done in the Norwegian context. So I'll be talking mostly about children's experiences in Norway when it comes to scented stories, but I do hope that there are some synergies also your context, and we can think about jointly about the application of my work to other geographical contexts. I guess I start from the premise that children's reading practices today are really multimedia in terms of different types of media that today's children have access to and are engaging with, but also multisensory. And it is the multisensory aspect that I'm really intrigued about and want to talk about in more detail, because I feel that the contemporary discussion has been very much driven by the technological trends that we are seeing that are not necessarily multisensory. Having said that, OpenAI and generative AI is increasingly venturing into the area of multisensory input. So I'm intrigued by the possibility of combining multiple senses in understanding literacy. I'll be talking about a specific project when referring to some empirical findings, so the evidence that we have been generating together with colleagues, and that specific project is funded by the Norwegian Research Council and the Jacobs Foundation, and you can find it on this URL. It's called Sensory Books Project in English. Teresa mentioned that I am a prolific writer. I guess I'm lucky enough to be working with some very interesting data and insightful colleagues who have been working on this project with me in terms of trying to understand what these data show us. So there are a couple of research articles that I'll try to summarize in my presentation, particularly looking at a study that we did with colleagues here, looking at families and their interaction with olfactory stories, as well as some reviews and conceptual pieces. And here are some more references that I'm very happy to share later on or discuss in more detail. But when I'm presenting, I'll be synthesizing the key insights from these different studies. I should say actually that I mentioned at the beginning that I'll be mostly looking at the Norwegian context, but 2 studies have been conducted in Malawi. So I'll be contrasting some of the insights we received from children in Norway with a study in Malawian classrooms. So those were the 2 publications with Nima Chimula. I would like us to consider the possibility that reading doesn't happen only in the brain, that it is an embodied experience where the whole body is part of what is happening when we engage with texts. And this notion that reading happens beyond the brain is something that has been inspiring my work, but also the work of colleagues who frame their work under the 4E, 4E frame, if you like. So the 4E cognition that looks at reading not only as embodied, but also an embedded, inactive, and extended practice. And I hope that as you listen to how I am thinking about how reading happens for young children, that you can see connections to these different E's as colleagues have been conceptualizing them. In my own work, I have been thinking a lot about how we can think about reading as a really complex activity that involves parents, children, different types of media that they engage with that come with different format characteristics. By that I mean different shapes and weight and colors and materials of the actual book or digital book or an e-book that children engage with, as well as the content that is inside this book, of course, matters in terms of the quality characteristics. Then there will be different embedded features within the medium. In case of the digital books, it will be music, voiceovers, different hotspots, the characters that are moving on the screen. And these different characteristics of the reading medium, together with the parent and child when they're engaging with the book, have an influence, have a joint influence on the specific outcomes that we are then investigating as researchers when we come to the investigation from a psychology perspective. Now, this perspective is one way of approaching the evaluation of children's digital book reading or children's reading more broadly. I guess what the 4E framework reminds us is that there are also these influences within what is happening multisensorially, what is happening within the embedded practice that is very much driven by contextual variation. And that is where sensory learning comes into place. So many people ask me, how did we come up with smell? Why are we interested in studying children's smell when it comes to literacy? And it is actually something that has been under research and under discussed when it comes to not only children's literacy, but also children's education more broadly. And it is a bit of a paradox because if you think about it during COVID, when many of us lost the sense of smell, we realized that it's actually a very important sense that contributes to our well-being. It contributes to our understanding of the environment. So smell as a sense that is centrally involved in education is something that is only emerging on the educational agenda and definitely within literacy. Now, in terms of the biological research, if you like, that has been conducted with smell as a sense that is central to human memory, we do know that there is this very close connection between smell and memory and smell and emotion. So I guess you all have an experience of when you smelled something that reminded you of your childhood, or perhaps an emotional memory that you have with a specific perfume of your friend or of your husband. You know, people who are close to us would have a characteristic smell that we memorize very closely. I can recognize it in various other contexts. And this is something that is actually possible to capitalize upon when we are thinking about environments and resources that can stimulate children's sense of smell and bring them to some emotional experiences. Now, smell and language is another under-researched but very exciting area, because often when we talk about smell, we lack the vocabulary to describe what we are smelling. So it tends to be this sort of positive versus negative, something smells good or something smells bad. And we often link it to a specific source of the smell, which can be food, plant, you know, things that we can name and often connect to color or to taste, but not necessarily things that would describe, I guess, an abstract quality of smell. And not all smells are concrete. There are very many smells that are abstract ambient smells that are difficult to capture with the limited vocabulary that we have when it comes to smell. So as it says here, we don't have the specialized words for describing different types of smell that we could be capturing in language in a much more precise vocabulary. And a bit of perhaps inspiration for us all is to think about cultures where there are more words to describe different types of smell, and how we can use that when thinking about innovation in early childhood and literacy. Because what I have been experiencing when talking with different groups of children is that their vocabulary when it comes to description of smell tends to be richer than the vocabulary we as adults use. So children would put words on smells that either adults don't perceive or don't name. You know, things like a spaceship that has a smell, or different fantasy objects that suddenly have a specific smell, a butterfly that has a smell, fairy tales where smell appears as part of the storyline. Those are the things that show me and colleagues that smell can be actually much more present in children's stories and children's understanding of the world than what the language allows us. Now, one way in how we've been trying to get to the child's perspective and understand better how children perceive smell and stories was to engage in participatory research. So to really center children in our work, to ensure that we do not impose adult perspective on what is pleasant and unpleasant smell, but that we understand better how they perceive the presence of smell in different stories. So we designed an exhibition in a local children's museum, where we invited children to walk around an exhibition that was constructed as a story with different smell boxes. And in that particular study, we were interested in children's agency, so children's volition and control, choices that they make as they are experiencing with their whole body how the story evolves, how the story plot is evolving when they are listening to, for example, different sounds of the wolf in the Three Little Pigs story, or when they are listening to teachers who are narrating the story. So here you can see the visuals of the Three Little Pigs story. That was a little poster at the beginning of the exhibition. And you can see the smell boxes, as we call them. So the different wooden boxes were under the perforated surface. There was essentially cotton balls that were infused with specific essential oils, connected to strategic points within the story. And as children were walking through the exhibition, they had the choice to open the smelly box or a nicely scented box. And we were interested in whether it will be an influence on their experience of the story. We constructed the 3 Little Pigs exhibition by drawing on the traditional 3 Little Pigs story, but we changed the ending a little bit, partly because of my preference for not having a very dramatic or drastic ending with the big bad wolf being burned, but rather just running away from the children. So we changed the story a little bit. And we also had some funny voiceover, in the sense that a local librarian very kindly agreed that he would record the whining sounds of the big bad wolf. So that's the last picture here, showing our librarian recording the sounds in the university studio. I guess what was one important lesson that I would like to convey for anyone who would like to do an olfactory story exhibition is that it's very important to think about the sequence of the different olfactory stations, or the different places where you have the stimulation with smell, whether it's in a box or in another format. Because for children who started the exhibition with a bad smell, they then perceived the whole exhibition to be smelling badly. There was a very strong primacy effect. Whereas for children who randomly entered these different olfactory stations, they had more variety in terms of how they experienced the different smells. So thinking about how the sequence, how we present the smells in a sequence is the key decision, not only for exhibitions that allow for the full body experience of a story, but actually also for the design of children's books. And I'll come back to that later. Another, I guess, key lesson for us, but also something that I'm now exploring more and more in adult literature, is that smell can very much modulate how we experience different story characters. So in this particular story, we had the Mama Peppa Pig, Mama Pig story, where the Mama Grisen was essentially the generous, good mummy of these 3 little pigs who left home to experience an adventure. And then the story followed the traditional 3 Little Pigs story, in the sense that the big bad wolf was trying to destroy their houses, and they needed to construct them of different materials. And the last pig, which is the one here with the spade, that was the clever pig who built a house made of bricks, and that was the house that survived. And what we did was to match specific colors with the smells that were in the boxes associated with these different characters. And it turns out that that is actually a very important technique, because if you think about different story characters and their role in story, it is a mechanism to guide understanding of the story and comprehension of the narrative. So for us, it was a very strategic decision in making sure that the color corresponds with the characteristics of the main story protagonists. In the example here, you see the pink pig who was the sort of Jole Grisen. So that was the pig who just enjoyed to be pretty and painted their nails and was happy in the little straw house and didn't want to do anything, just sort of sitting there and looking at the mirror. And that particular smell had this very sweet raspberry flavor. Whereas the reading pick was placed in a little house made of wood, equipped with some nice books and this sort of nice, calming pine tree smell to encourage children to be a little bit in the reading pig house and sit there on small cushions and enjoy some reading. And it's just the clever pig that was supposed to be the clever pig who built a house of bricks where children come and can just relax and be happy and comforted that the big bad wolf has disappeared. There we wanted to have a smell that would make children feel comfortable and relaxed. So we asked the olfactory artists that we work with to help us design a smell that reminded children of warmth, like cocoa, chocolate smell, a really rich smell that lingers in the air. And it was only partially successful because when we combined the brown color with this chocolate smell, it made children think that that's a bad smell. So in that house, we didn't have many children who wanted to actually stay in the house. There was a lot of laughter and a lot of children just opening the doors and leaving the house because they were joking that it smells of poo and they have to leave because the chocolate was cooked badly or whatever. So it's very important to pay attention to colors that we pair up with different smells. And especially if we then match it with different personalities of story characters. So that was another lesson learned for us when thinking about how to incorporate smell into children's stories, not only the sequence, but also how we then design environments that either match or mismatch with different colors, and being very mindful of how that mismatch might then influence children's experience of the story. So here is just a little summary of what I've just explained. The hedonic quality in terms of the emotional quality of the smell is something that we played a little bit around in terms of the negative and positive. And we have seen in later studies that is actually something that can be helpful for constructing a narrative arc, in the sense that you start with some neutral smells that gradually can move to a more dramatic, perhaps very negative smell, and then ease down towards positive smells. So this exhibition and all the work that went into its design was a very helpful, I guess, exercise for us and the librarians and teachers, olfactory artists and the children themselves, in terms of understanding what is possible when we use smell to enrich a very traditional fictional story, a traditional fairy tale. So you can see here that it was a very simple design of the different houses. This was a small budget study, but it became so popular that the exhibition times were extended twice. So it was something that stayed in the Children's Museum and was then also transported to the local library. So it became a bit of a portable exhibition. So we are now thinking about using other stories that we can enrich with these smell boxes. And given that it was quite a simple design, it's easy to just change the smell that is inside the boxes, and you can then have a different story, different experience for the children. Now, thinking about how can we take some of these lessons to the classroom, and how can we stimulate children's sense of smell in classroom environments? That is something that we explore with colleagues who either directly work as teachers or educational professionals in local schools and kindergartens, but also those who have been working in this space as artists and are now increasingly providing various workshops with young children to encourage their sense of smell. So it's an area where you really have multiple disciplines coming into play and multiple expertise that I, as a researcher, need to draw on to understand what is possible. given that it is such an under-researched field. And I'm keen to explore it more from a holistic perspective, rather than just looking at smell, say, from a chemical perspective or only a literary perspective. It's an element in research that has a lot of potential, especially in education, and that is where this interdisciplinary perspective has served as well in the project. Now, in one of the studies that I thought might be interesting for you to hear about is that when we asked children to make their own stories using some open-ended materials, as you can see on the table, we gave children some feathers, some of these small wooden toys that they can paint on if they wish, but mostly just to sort of put them together in any shape or form they wished. We realized that smell does come quite often in their narratives, in their accounts, when they're talking about different stories that they make up. And it was in here that I saw, together with Monica Kamola, who co-authored the study with me, that it's extremely important to really foreground children's agency in this work. Because if we don't do that, I worry that we would miss the richness of children's own description when it comes to smell and stories. So it was in this study where children were talking about smell being the guide towards a spaceship in the universe, a little boy recounting the story of his little spaceship traveling and encountering these different smells on the way, or another 4-year-old girl who was telling us a story about a butterfly that had a distinct smell, and it was the way to get all these different flowers to bloom. So children can come to smell from an unusual perspective that I feel is very little reflected in the stories that they are exposed to these days. That also then motivated our systematic literature search and looking at what is actually available in terms of how smell is represented in children's stories currently. And that was a study with Selim Tosun, where we systematically reviewed most popular children's books on the market. And there were either no references to smell, or where there were some references, it was a very basic, like something smelled bad or something smelled good. So very, black and white thinking, rather than going into the richness of abstract smells that the children told us about. So big inspiration for any authors listening. If you want to write a nice children's story, do incorporate some smells and children's ideas. This is also something that Professor Charles Spencer has been saying in terms of how smell is incorporated in adult experiences, and mostly in terms of museums and cinema, where it has been used a little bit as a gimmick rather than an enrichment of the story. So thinking about how we can innovate in this space, it really is going beyond the gimmicky version of smell, adding it as an add-on, like you have designed a full story experience, or you have perhaps designed a full cinema experience or an entertainment experience. If smell was not central to that design process, then it will be probably just an add-on that doesn't necessarily expand users or viewers' experience of the story. So what Professor Charles Spencer and now also myself are advocating for is that we could actually start from smell and then design different studies and see where that takes us, how that might influence stories, not only in the printed format, so children's books, but also stories in the multimedia format, whether that is different films or perhaps different children's apps and ebooks. Now, I've been talking until now about smells that are part of the story in the sense that they might be either inside specific pages, so they could be part of the scratch and sniff surface, you know, where you need to activate the smell by scratching, or they can be part of the story in terms of the smell boxes that I showed you. But actually, it is very important to think about smell that is around us as readers, as learners. We are sitting in spaces that would have a specific smell. And these ambient smells that are around us are also very much implicated in how we understand stories and how we enjoy stories. I mean, there is this sort of obvious thing in the sense that if there is a bad smell, it will interrupt the reading experience. But if there is a good smell, it might well be a mechanism to engage children to read for longer. It might ease them down in the experience in the sense that they might be less stressed, they might be enjoying the story more. So there are some exciting studies that we are exploring with colleagues to see how we can use smell to encourage more of this enjoyment, intrinsic motivation that is so important for sustained reading engagement. And what is the role of smell in those engagements? So this is where we are looking at the typical essential oils that you would have heard of, like peppermint, citrus oils that are often about awakening the senses, so getting children's attention, versus more of the calming smells like vanilla, sandalwood, ylang ylang, so flowery scents that tend to have the effect of calm and ease. Here is an olfactory audit in a typical kindergarten in Norway, where we looked at some specific time points. So that's the first column, and then looking at the types of smell that were present at that specific time point. Where exactly we experienced the smell, and was it the child or was it the adult who initiated the smell, you know, by perhaps opening the door or opening the window. And the reason we did this olfactory audit was precisely to capture the different ambient smells that are present in an everyday environment, such as a kindergarten classroom. And I recommend that this kind of systematic evaluation of smell is undertaken by anyone who is interested in either studying or influencing smells, because it allows you to understand whether, for example, reading a book that has this scratch and sniff surface is going to be as effective as it could be, because if you have many strong smells around a child, then it becomes difficult to focus on the reading resource that has a very specific smell embedded in it. In this particular example, there were some strong smells from the coffee, from the breakfast that the children had in the morning, the perfume of the teacher. So that, of course, influences the ambient smells, which then will influence the experience of the reading and are important to take into account. So a good baseline to start with mapping the different smells that children are exposed to in their everyday classrooms and in their everyday environments. So here you see a little smell map, so mapping the different smells that are in the immediate environment in the city. And here looking at the typical smells that are in different areas within a kindergarten, with the different colors and size of the bubbles here representing the intensity and types of smell. So not surprisingly, a lot of the smells will be concentrated in the bathroom area. Sometimes that is not fully separated from the drawing or free play area, where many of the reading activities might happen. So thinking about smell as a sort of ambient experience and holistic experience within the classroom, it's important to take into account all the ambient smells around the child, as well as within specific objects, such as books. And I would advocate for involving children in these olfactory audits and smell mapping as much as possible. So here is a little map that was drawn by a group of children we invited on a smell walk with us in the neighborhood in one Norwegian kindergarten. And they just drew different things they remembered from the smell walk. So as you can see, all kinds of different things, including a Christmas tree that happened to be on this spring wall somewhere. Or another example here, again, the legend that was put there together by the teacher, but the children who drew things that they remembered having distinct smells during their walk. I guess this emphasis on involving the children in mapping different smells is important also when we think about what is happening with biodiversity loss and the different olfactoscapes, or the different environments that we are creating with different odors and smells that might be soon disappearing because of the plants and biodiversity that is disappearing. That has an effect on the odors that children experience today and might not experience in the future. So for us as researchers, it was very important to involve children in this experience and involve their teachers and parents when thinking about this distinction between natural versus artificial smells, healthy or toxic smells, and of course, outdoor and indoor. And in Malawi, in the study that we did with Nima Chinula, we asked children about their favorite smells. And what we saw was that a lot of these were directly food related, with local foods and local plants mentioned, but also object related, such as the smell of new clothes being their favorite smell, or human related, the smell of my dad. So there were some lovely accounts from the children telling us what they perceived as the most favorite smell. And that were quite different from the responses we received from children in Norway. So if you ever have the possibility for a cross-cultural study, I encourage you to ask children what is their favorite smell and see how it can be captured in drawings and how it relates to their everyday experiences. Because this too is then reflected in the literacy materials that children are exposed to in their classrooms, or the stories that they make themselves. So a very nice exercise for us is to encourage children to make stories that include or don't necessarily have to include smell, but that make them think about the environment in terms of the ambience that is created with multiple senses. And that brings me to this notion of different types of behaviors that we as adults, but also children have when it comes to recognizing and perceiving different types of smell. Because often, I have actually seen that quite often with children who may have not been encouraged to think about smell as something central to their experience of stories, that it takes some time to develop the right olfactory behavior, if you like. So knowing how to smell for how long, whether it's just sniffing or whiffing or wafting. There are several techniques in terms of how you can engage with a book that is enhanced with smell, such as a scratch and sniff book, or how you can perceive the smell around you in your environment. And I'm talking here specifically about what we learned in a study with parents and children who had the scratch and sniff book, Peter Follows His Nose by Beatrix Potter, and where we studied very closely how they are engaging with these scratch and sniff surfaces. So you can see here that in some instances it were both the parent and child smelling. In some instances it was only the child. Sometimes it was the child showing the parent where the scratchy surface was, and sometimes it was the parent scratching and then almost transporting the smell on their finger towards the child's nose. So some lovely interactions that can happen when we enhance books with smell. And here you can see some more examples. I particularly adored when the boy would just become absorbed in the book, inhaling the different smells, and then a lot of humorous, a lot of funny moments happening when you sort of introduce smell to the typical book reading experience at home. So for me as a person who has been sort of looking into reading from a multimedia perspective to start off with, and the different transactions that happen as we as readers are engaging in different types of texts, it has been extremely enriching to expand that understanding with olfaction. And it is something that I believe will become more and more important as we're trying to think about new ways of how to engage readers and how to not overstimulate young children with new types of books, such as digital books, but rather to meaningfully guide them in reading comprehension and in experiencing stories in their full richness. And I do feel that that is a space where smell can play a very important role, and is something that will also be opening our research frameworks and theoretical understandings of how reading actually happens. So I'll finish here with a little note on our current experiment, where we are looking at digital books and small canisters that emit specific smells at specific points in the children's story, and we want to understand whether that will influence children's story understanding, and if so, how. Will it overwhelm them or will it guide them? So some very careful calibration that is important there. And juxtaposing it with the current choice of books that children have when it comes to smell, in terms of the very stereotypical scratch and sniff books that are only about bad smells or some food smells, but not necessarily going beyond the gimmicky use of odors in children's stories. So hopefully there'll be more innovation happening also in terms of the content of children's stories. And for those of you who work directly with children, I do encourage you to take children on a smell walk and then talk about smell, or a scent trail, whatever you call it, but essentially the notion of involving children centrally in exploring the different smells around us, so that we better understand how to incorporate them with their stories. So I'll stop here and open to questions and comments. Thank you very much for listening, and of course, very happy to share any of the resources I shared today also later on by email. So those are my contact details.
Thank you so much, Natalia. That was such a stimulating discussion and presentation. I'm sure for many people listening today, like me, have really not given that much thought to the importance of smell in children's stories and literacies in their lives generally. So it's so wonderful to see you engage in such an extensive body of work in this space. I'd like to invite people in our audience to post their questions in the chat, and then I will sort of field those to Natalia. So please type those there. We'll try to get through as many as we can in the next sort of 10 minutes or so. Just whilst we're waiting for those, if I can start with a bit of a comment, I can see such potential I'm thinking very much about your work on personalization of stories and the ways in which children tell their own stories. You know, we know that some children have such difficulty describing how they feel, but to be able to describe how something smelled could be a real step in to describing an experience. Is that something you've thought about at all?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lucy. Absolutely. I wonder how much we can think about smell as an entry point into a story, right? So thinking about starting there rather than with the visual or with a signal that comes from the so-called higher senses, right? So whether it is hearing or the visual, I guess smell could be very much a prompt for children's story writing, and it is certainly something that has been used before, but more like, you know, the Proustian moment where Marcel Proust was using his Madeleine to go back into his childhood memories. So it's about how much we want it to be directed and how much it just happens naturally, you know, like while you are sitting in an environment that a memory comes and then you're on a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly could discuss this all day, but I'm going to go to some of the questions that are in the chat. So we've got first comment from Susan. The pink, pretty and clever binary in this story concerns me, particularly if smell then reinforces stereotypes. I also wonder more generally about the issue of consent in educational settings, as some children might experience any strong smells as adversive.
Oh, that's a great comment. I agree with you, and I have been thinking about how the current ethical guidelines we have in terms of children's consent might need to be updated when it comes to multisensory education. I would say that the way we have been addressing it is to make sure that it is always about this ongoing consent. So even if at the beginning of the study, a child says, yes, this is something they want to participate in, it may become different when they experience the bad smell, right? So checking all the time with the child that it's okay to participate and that consent is an ongoing negotiation, I guess, is very important. And about the stereotypical smells, that's such a great point. I don't quite know how to best address it, how much these stereotypical representations are adult-led, how much they are something that children might perceive differently. For us in that particular story, it was something that was led by collaborating with this olfactory artist. And what we decided there was to follow this reworked version of the 3 little pigs that the librarian helped us to think about in terms of the different characteristics of the protagonists. And then the choice of the colors and the specific smells that are attached to them were also guided by actually the children's responses in the piloting. So I guess we ended up with this amalgam of adults and children's perspectives. And I take that point that it could be perceived as a stereotypical depiction of the protagonists, and certainly something to be aware of.
Thank you. But I think you've explained just how much thought and consideration has gone into this project. We have another question from Kim. Have you found that scent, smell can remind children of certain stories or certain characters?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm trying to think which study that would be, because in Malawi, we actually wanted children to talk more about their stories and favorite smells, but it became very much a conversation. That was a conversation between the researcher and the children. It turned out to be a very much a conversation about their favorite smells overall rather than specific stories. So there we didn't notice that in the data. And in the study that we did in Norway, it was more about generating new stories. So encouraging children to either make up a story or draw a story. So actually, I didn't see that in my data, but I think it's very plausible.
Yeah, thank you. And a question from Becky. Thinking of the use of smell in younger children's literature, I can think of a lot of stories about those, body odors. I'm in the office, I'm not going to read that out loud. Treated in a light-hearted, but also quite visceral way. And this chimes with younger children's interest in talking about these things. Have you come across this in any way?
What was the first part, Lucy, when you were saying whether I came across the visceral part and
this chimes with younger children's interests in the way it's treated in a light-hearted way and also quite a visceral way.
Yeah. I mean, for younger children, especially when they're just beyond the infant's age, there is nothing more funny than be talking about the smell of,
Yes.
That is how you really get them engaged and how you get to the very funny experience of laughter and all that. So in the exhibition, we had the bad smell of the pig pen, so, where the pigs were living. And that was a combination of urine, poo, a really bad smell. And that was such a humorous part of the exhibition and really a way for children to get their parents like dragging them in there, and their teachers, they had to smell, and then it was so funny. And so I guess it's one way of how you can engage children, but definitely not the only way. So it's quite interesting how the literature is evolving in this space as well, in terms of incorporating different smells to engage children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it must be fairly universal, isn't it, that young children just find that hilarious.
Yeah, it's that age,
Yes. A question from Ella saying, this has been so interesting. Have you ever turned it around to ask children to choose which smells they think would link to the character in the story, rather than you choosing the smells?
Yes, we did. We did, and in fact, in one of the studies, we did ask children quite specifically to tell us about the smells of the story characters that they made up. So it could be a fairy, it could be Mummy, who would be the story hero. So we would ask them what was the smell. But what we didn't do, and I wish we had better tools to do, would be to recreate the smell that they are describing verbally into an actual smell. So that is a study that I'm hoping to get some funding for, where we can probe children's description of smell with some actual smells that we design, because it takes a lot of time to design a smell and to make a smell that reflects the smell that you have in your mind, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So that is a study that I haven't done and would love to do.
Yes. And then I think maybe more of a comment than a question from Lizzie. I'm fascinated by the cultural differences in terms of ambient smells in which you mentioned. Oh, could you expand on some of the differences here between the Malawian and the Norwegian children? This would make a really good small-scale study in the classroom and maybe linked to social reading spaces.
Oh, thank you for that question. Yeah, it is something that I hope to learn. I hope that I myself can learn more about that, because we are very much at the beginning stages here. But in Norway, the notion of outdoor learning is so ingrained in how routines happen in kindergartens that a lot of the smells that we notice during olfactory audits were natural smells that were pleasant, natural smells that you would encounter in the woods, that you would encounter in the park, in the garden. Whereas in Malawi, partly because of the choice of the specific research study, the ambient smells, on average, when you look across the sort of olfactory log and what was happening at specific time intervals, on average, they wouldn't be so pleasant for various reasons. It could be that the classroom would be very crowded, that children wouldn't be outside so much, that there were not so many plants around or trees around a specific classroom. So for various reasons, in these very small scale observations, there were differences in terms of what children experience on a daily basis as part of their community setting. So it's an important area of research where I think we might be able to derive some important insights in terms of the design of the learning spaces and learning environments. So the notion of these olfactory logs is just a way to get there so that we have the understanding for what can be done and improved.
Thank you. And we have, I can see there's a number of comments, people describing some of their experiences with sensory stories and using smell in the classroom. Ella just has a question, not only for Natalia, but anyone. Do you know of a good source of sturdy smell boxes that could be handled safely by children? So I'm just wondering where you sourced yours, Natalia.
Yeah, so when it comes to smells and young children, it's very important to avoid allergies, to make sure that the smells are safe and are at concentration levels that would cater for the different age groups that you might have in a typical kindergarten. So, you know, to start off with, to just sort of do a proper scan in terms of what children might be allergic to by asking parents, teachers, and then working with professionals who dilute them and prepare them for the study or for the engagement. So we worked with essentially people who are either trained perfumerists or so-called olfactory artists. So people who know how to make these dilutions and how to design these smells. I have now trained in perfumery as well, so hopefully I can design them soon myself, but it's important to do that well, and there are organizations that can help with that. And the wooden boxes, that is something that we just did at the university, so basically taken some wood and some pretty wooden boxes. So that is hopefully not so difficult to design.
Yes. Okay, I think we had better leave it there. I'm sure there's far more questions as well. So I just like to take the opportunity to thank Natalia again. I'm sure everybody will join me in that. It's been such an interesting and thought-provoking session, and I'm sure we'll all be going away to think far more deeply about the significance of smell in young children's experiences, as well as specifically in their literacy. Thank you, Natalia.
Thanks very much, Lucy, and many thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.